got pizza the wrong way.
Crust first.
Sanyo has been a leader in tape recorders for years, helping to make them better.
Best catch of the day. Yeah.
VHS, the 4-hour system.
If you grew up in the 1980s, you remember this. TVs that buzzed before they lit up, cassette tapes that needed a pencil, and mornings that started with cartoons and ended with scraped knees. Growing up in the 1980s wasn't just an era, it was a feeling. And if you remember this, it never really left you. Back before virtual reality, ViewMaster reels were the closest thing to teleportation we had. A small red plastic viewer, chunky and indestructible, that you held up to your face like some kind of sci-fi binoculars. But inside, whole worlds waited. You'd flick the lever with your thumb and instantly jump from a still frame of Mount Rushmore to a three-dimensional jungle scene with elephants that felt like they could walk right out of the frame. Some reels were cartoons, others were travel photos, some were straight-up educational, which somehow made you like them even more. They were quiet, simple, and personal. You did not share your ViewMaster. That was yours. A private little universe. Every kid had their favorite reel. Maybe it was the one with dinosaurs. Maybe it was the space shuttle. Whatever it was your escape hatch from a math worksheet or a rainy Saturday. The 1980s weren't about flashy screens or downloads. They were about plastic, paper, light, and wonder. And somehow, that was enough. Actually, it was more than enough. But if you really wanted to feel like you were holding the future in your hands, you did not stop at a ViewMaster. You went for the gadget that talked back. Speak and spell. A name so simple, you almost forget just how advanced it felt. This little orange learning machine had a robotic voice that felt both comforting and unsettling at the same time. The keys were rubbery. The screen was a small LED display. And the second it powered on, you felt like a kid genius. This was not just a toy, it was a computer. At least to us it was. And for a lot of people, it was the first time they ever heard a machine talk to them like a teacher would. It would ask you to spell elephant or photograph in that slow, mechanical voice. If you got it wrong, it would buzz like you had just activated some kind of self-destruct sequence. And if you nailed it, that same robotic voice gave you praise like it meant something, like it knew you. Speak and spell was part game, part lesson, and 100% magic. You did not need Wi-Fi. You did not need batteries half the time. All you needed was the imagination to believe that this talking toy was the smartest machine in the house. And sometimes, it probably was. Of course, intelligence was one thing, but style? That was another story. If you were the kid with this next item, everyone knew you had your life together. Owning a Trapper Keeper in the 1980s felt like owning a briefcase made just for kids, but with neon colors, Velcro, and personality. These were not just folders. These were statements. You did not just store your homework in a Trapper Keeper. You stored your identity. From bold geometric designs to wild illustrations of race cars, dolphins, or laser grids that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie, the outside of your Trapper Keeper said something about you. And that satisfying rip of the Velcro? That was music. It had pockets for pencils, slots for notes, compartments you never used but felt cooler just knowing they were there. There was something so absurdly organized about them that it made you want to turn your life into a schedule. You would write the dates on your notebook dividers, color code your subjects, and then forget all of it by Wednesday. But hey, the effort was there. You felt important carrying one around. It made you feel like you were growing up. And even if you never opened it for anything other than doodling weird cartoons during math class, it still felt like a win. But when it came to keeping track of things, there was one object that really made you feel like a collector. And not just of stuff, but of memories. Blank VHS tapes were not just empty plastic boxes. They were treasure chests. The kind you could label, relabel, and fill up with your own little corner of television history. You remember the sound, right? That whirring click as the VCR accepted your latest recording project, whether it was The Muppet Show, a Disney movie airing on Saturday night, or just some random commercials you ended up watching later like they were rare artifacts. Back then, taping something off television was serious business. You had to time it perfectly. hit record at just the right moment, or risk catching the tail end of a news anchor saying, "And now," before your show started. Fast-forwarding past commercials felt like a power move. Rewinding? An art form. And if you had one of those little tape rewinder machines shaped like a car, you were basically living in luxury. You wrote on those little white stickers with a level of care that rivaled school projects. Do not tape over. Disney only. Toys R Us ad. Keep forever. And when someone in the house recorded over your stuff with a football game, that was war. But if you wanted to really test your patience and your brain power, there was only one screen-based challenge that ruled them all. You had not lived until you beat the Oregon Trail without dying of dysentery. That was the holy grail of 1980s computer gaming. Those chunky gray computers in the school lab, that pixelated map, that relentless text box reminding you that little Timothy had broken a leg and your oxen just drowned crossing a river. Iconic. It was not just a game, it was survival. You learned real-life lessons in that pixel wilderness. Like how much meat you could carry back from a hunt, not much, or why you should never try to ford a river without thinking it through. And somehow, we were totally into it. The green and black graphics, the clunky keyboard, the fact that it felt like schoolwork but kind of fun. You would all huddle around one screen, a group of 5 kids making group decisions like mini pioneers, and somehow it felt like the fate of your wagon family actually mattered. It was your first taste of choices in gaming, your first little moral dilemmas. Do you trade clothing for bullets? Do you rest for 2 days? Or do you push on and risk everyone freezing to death? Still, once the school bell rang, it was game over. And if you wanted to know what was playing in theaters that weekend, you did not Google it. You picked up the phone. Before Fandango or streaming apps told us what was playing, there was the operator. And calling the theater was an event in itself. You would dial a number, usually a long one, and wait as a robotic voice or sometimes an actual person listed off every movie and showtime like it was the State of the Union. Showtimes for the weekend of July 24th, Gremlins at 7:30, The Goonies at 9:15, Ghostbusters at 10:45. You could not skip ahead. You had to listen. Carefully. And maybe even write it down if you were planning a big night. If someone in the house picked up the phone while you were listening, forget it. You had to start over. And if you called during a busy hour, good luck hearing anything over the static and background noise. But it was still exciting. The build-up, the anticipation. You felt like you were about to join something important, something bigger than yourself. Because back then, watching a movie meant going somewhere. It meant tickets, seats, sticky floors, and that one kid who always threw popcorn. It meant magic. But if you wanted movie magic at home, you did not need a theater. You just needed to clear your schedule, grab the good blanket, and stake your claim on the couch. Made-for-television movies in the 1980s were not just filler. They were events. Whole nights were planned around them. When that promo would come on, this Sunday, only on ABC. You would perk up, lean in, and make mental notes to not miss it. This was before DVR, before pause buttons. You missed it? You missed it. These movies had titles like The Day After, V, The Final Battle, or The Ewok Adventure. Some were tearjerkers, some were thrillers, some were straight-up terrifying. And they had you glued to the screen, wondering how they managed to squeeze so much drama into 2 hours. Plus, commercials. Families would make popcorn, dim the lights, and treat it like it was an actual premiere. You watched it live together, and you talked about it the next day at school. Because chances were, everyone saw it too. They hit different. The music, the narration, even that grainy picture. It all added to the mood. You were not just watching. You were part of something. And right in the middle of those movies came the strange intermissions, ones that could go from innocent to haunting in 5 seconds flat. Public service announcements in the 1980s were something else. You would be watching cartoons or a sitcom, then suddenly, boom. The screen would cut to a gray filter, eerie music, and a serious voice saying, "This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs." Or a crash dummy flying through a windshield, or a puppet warning you not to talk to strangers. They were dramatic, unsettling, and weirdly unforgettable. One minute you were giggling at Garfield. The next you were wondering if touching a light socket would make you disappear forever. These announcements were designed to scare you straight, and they worked. They haunted your dreams and followed you into adulthood. Some used animation. Some used real actors with tear-streaked cheeks and slow zooms, and all of them felt like they were speaking directly to you. But even with the ominous tones, there was something strangely comforting about them, like the world was trying to look out for you, even if it scared you a little. They were a strange part of growing up, and honestly, we would be lying if we said we did not remember them word for word. Still, if there was one thing that really balanced it all out, it was the glory of waking up at sunrise for the lineup of legends. Saturday morning cartoons were not just shows. They were rituals. You would wake up at 6 or 7, bowl of cereal in hand, and stake out your spot in front of the television before anyone else in the house even stirred, pajamas still on, eyes still half shut. But you were ready. The networks fought hard for your attention. ABC, NBC, CBS, they all rolled out animated powerhouses like The Smurfs, He-Man, The Real Ghostbusters, Gem, G.I. Joe, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Each show had its slot, and missing one felt like missing a holiday. But for every golden episode came the heartbreak of your favorite show being bumped, or worse, replaced. The dreaded special news report could interrupt your flow like a slap to the face. You would sit there in disbelief as your cartoon got pulled for a political debate or weather update. No warnings, no mercy. Still, the lineup gave you something to look forward to all week, and for those few hours, everything felt right in the world. Cartoons, cereal, and commercials that somehow got stuck in your head forever. Because let's be honest, there are still jingles from that era that we can sing from memory, word for word. Commercial jingles in the 1980s were not just background noise. They were the soundtrack of your childhood. Short, catchy, and borderline hypnotic. From "I do not want to grow up, I am a Toys R Us kid," to my buddy, wherever I go, he goes." These little songs became national earworms. You knew the tune before you even understood the product. And even now, decades later, you probably remember all the lyrics without trying. Fast food chains, toys, theme songs for cereal, they all knew how to brand themselves right into your brain. And we loved it. These were not just ads. They were pop culture. Kids would sing them on the playground like they were chart-topping hits. Some even had dance routines. And the best ones? They felt like a little burst of joy in between the shows you came to watch. It was marketing, sure, but it was also magic. A 30-second clip that made you beg your parents for action figures, Happy Meals, or the latest sugary snack with a weird mascot. And yes, even today, if you hear the opening note of gimme a break," you know exactly what is coming. But when it came to making your own mix of hits, that required serious patience and a strong dislike for chatty radio DJs. Taping songs off the radio was a sacred mission. You would sit for hours next to your boombox, finger hovering over the record button, praying that the next song would be the one. And when it was, you had one shot to catch it clean, no static, no interruptions, and above all, no DJ talking over the intro. But of course, they always did. The opening notes would hit, your heart would race, and just as you hit record, that was the latest from Madonna. Coming up next, we've got... And just like that, your perfect mixtape moment was ruined. You would yell at the radio like the DJ could hear you. Why? Why do you do this to me? It was a battle of timing and nerves. Some kids got sneaky and recorded during the night shift when the hosts were quieter. Others became masters of timing, predicting when the chorus would drop, when the ad break would hit. It took real skill. And even if you missed a few seconds of the intro, you still labeled the tape like it was gold. You were not just building a playlist, you were capturing a moment. Free music, sure, but earned through effort, patience, and pure willpower. And if you were serious about your song collection, you were not stopping at one track. You were building an entire soundscape, one emotional banger at a time. Making a mixtape in the 1980s was not just about the music, it was about what the music meant. This was not a playlist you could throw together in 5 minutes. This was a curated collection of feelings, carefully selected for maximum emotional impact. Every track had a purpose. Every order was intentional. You did not just make mixtapes for yourself. You made them for friends, for crushes, for breakups, for birthdays, for sitting in your room, staring at the ceiling, thinking deep thoughts you had no business thinking at that age. You would spend hours hitting pause and record, rewinding to check the transition, trying to fit exactly the right number of songs on each side without cutting one off too soon. There was a science to it, a rhythm, a philosophy, and then came the cover art. Doodles, stickers, fake band logos, scribbled lyrics, little hearts and broken hearts. The label on a mixtape said everything about who you were or who you wanted to be. These tapes were gifts, time capsules, emotional resumes. You gave one to someone and it meant something. It meant a lot. But if you did not have the patience or just wanted to cheat the system a little, you could always get a dozen albums for the price of a gumball. Almost. The Columbia House penny deal felt like a loophole in the universe. You sent in a little card, maybe glued a few stamps to it, and next thing you knew, your mailbox was blessed with 12 brand new cassette tapes, or compact discs if you were ahead of the curve. All for just 1 cent. 1 cent. It felt like a scam in your favor. No way this is real, you thought. But there it was. Whitney Houston, Prince, Bon Jovi, Huey Lewis, boom! Delivered to your doorstep like you were some kind of record label executive. Of course, the catch was that you had to buy more albums at full price later. Parents were suspicious. Some tried to stop you. Others fell into the trap themselves. It was like a rite of passage. A shared secret. A little music heist you got away with. Until the bill came due, of course. Still, there was no denying the power of opening that box. Shrink-wrapped covers. That new plastic smell. Your very own collection. But for real-time music discovery? You only needed one thing. 3 letters, 1 channel, and a whole lot of attitude. MTV in the 1980s was not just a channel. It was a movement. The second you heard that iconic, "I want my MTV," you knew you were about to step into another world. A world where music lived on your screen, not just your speakers. Where your favorite artist could become a visual legend. It played music videos, actual music videos, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That meant you could go from watching Cyndi Lauper dancing through city streets to seeing Michael Jackson turn into a werewolf without ever leaving your couch. Music became cinematic. Performances became stories. Seeing someone on TV who made you feel like you were not the only weirdo out there. And maybe, just maybe, being a weirdo was cool. MTV introduced you to bands you never heard of, genres you never explored, and visuals that burned into your brain like neon on wet pavement. You would tape videos, argue over countdowns, and swear that your favorite video was art. But when you got back to school, it was back to basics, and one look at your folder would say everything your mouth could not. The peachy folder was like a social billboard. Everyone had one. Those tan or yellow folders with athletes printed in faded ink on the front, football players mid-tackle, baseball players mid-swing. They were meant to be neutral, practical, but they never stayed that way. Because the moment that folder landed on your desk, it became a war zone of doodles, lightning bolts, band logos, stencils, flames, hearts with names inside them, graffiti letters that took 15 tries to get right. Every inch of it became your personal art gallery or battlefield. These things aged like ancient relics by the time June came around. It did not matter how boring the class was. Your peachy folder made sure you had something to focus on, something to claim. And if a substitute teacher tried to take it away, that was a declaration of war. Of course, personal style extended beyond the page, because it was not just about what you carried. It was about what you wore. And in the 1980s, you had better know how to roll your jeans, or risk social exile. Rolling your jeans just right was a survival skill, not a fashion choice, not an accessory, a literal social defense mechanism. There was an art to it. You did not just cuff them, you pegged them tight. You folded the excess denim at the ankle into a clean little dart, then rolled that upward twice until it hugged your leg like a denim seatbelt. If it came loose, you were done for. You had to get the taper right. You walked into school knowing your style was locked in place. It said, "Yeah, I know what I'm doing." This was before skinny jeans, before stretch denim. This was raw, stiff, unforgiving cotton, and you worked with it like a sculptor with a chisel. Of course, some kids took it to the next level. Rolled jeans and slouchy socks, rolled jeans and high-top sneakers. If you had the confidence, you pulled it off. If you didn't, you learned the hard way. Kids were ruthless. But the same kids who teased you about your jeans would be the ones cheering beside you when the school gym went dark and the laser lights came out. School assemblies in the 1980s were not just announcements and clunky microphones. They were events. You would shuffle into the gym, trying to guess whether you were about to sit through a speech about school lunch changes or something unforgettable. And when the lights dimmed and you heard that synth-heavy intro track kick in, you knew it was going to be one of the good ones. Laser light shows were the crown jewels of assembly programming. Some company would roll in a smoke machine, a projector, and speakers that vibrated the bleachers. Suddenly, the gym was a concert hall. Multicolored lights zipped through the air in time with Queen, Journey, or whatever band had not yet been declared devil music. It was hypnotizing. You forgot you were at school. For a few minutes, it felt like a music video beamed straight from the future. Then came the shift. The lights changed. The tone got serious. Cue the slow-motion footage, the testimonials, the tears. Whether it was DARE, Just Say No, or some traveling team of very serious ex-skaters, you got the message. And even if you tuned it out, you still left feeling something. But if you were lucky, next period had a free block. And that meant the sacred ritual of heads down, thumbs up. Heads up, 7-Up was more than a game. It was a cultural phenomenon, a secret handshake between students and substitute teachers. It was their way of saying, "Yeah, I'm not teaching anything today either." And we were fine with that. You would hear the announcement and your whole class would light up. Put your heads down, close your eyes, and put one thumb up. The shuffle of sneakers, the giggle suppression, the electric anticipation of maybe, just maybe, getting picked. 7 kids would wander the room pressing down thumbs like chosen ones. And then came the moment of truth. Heads up, who touched you? That sentence alone could send a wave of anxiety through the room. You guessed wrong, back to your seat. You guessed right, you got to switch places. Victory. It was like the Olympics of elementary school, if the Olympics were fueled by Capri Suns and lunchroom gossip. No prizes, no points, just pride. And if you were one of the kids who got picked regularly, you walked a little taller afterward. You were known. You had taste. But when it came to classroom status symbols, nothing held as much weight as the prize at the bottom of your cereal box. Caring way too much about what came in your cereal box was just part of the 1980s experience. It was not even about the cereal. It could have tasted like cardboard dust for all we cared. What mattered was the prize inside. That tiny plastic toy, decoder ring, or glow-in-the-dark sticker was the reason we begged our parents for the sugar-loaded box of goodness in the first place. And once you got it, all rules went out the window. Forget pouring a bowl like a normal person. You reached into that box, elbow deep, rooting around for treasure like a raccoon on a mission. You wanted the cereal because of the real Ghostbusters erasers, because of Transformers trading cards, because of My Little Pony stickers. The commercials made them look like holy grails, glowing in cereal rainbows. And heaven help you if you collected 3 out of 4 toys and the 4th was available by mail with 5 proofs of purchase. Sure, cereal is still around, but it has not hit the same since those days. Maybe it is the nostalgia. Or maybe it is just that nothing feels as magical as a toy in a bag of marshmallow puffs. But when it came to real magic, you found that in a red booth under stained glass lamps with a personal pan pizza on the way. Going to Pizza Hut in the 1980s was like going out to a real restaurant. You did not just eat pizza, you dined. Those dark wooden booths, the checkerboard tablecloths, The Tiffany-style stained glass lamps glowing overhead, they made you feel like you were part of something bigger, a celebration, a moment. You would sit down and immediately scan for those iconic red plastic cups, the ones that looked like they had been sandblasted and built to survive 100 dish cycles. The soda hit different in those. Crisper, colder, more official. And let's not forget the Book It program. You read a certain number of books, got a button with little stickers, and then traded that for a free personal pan pizza. Reading had never been so rewarding. That pizza arrived hot, crispy, and cut into 4 perfect slices. It was not fast food. It was not fine dining. It was Pizza Hut. And in the 1980s, that meant everything. Of course, if you were not going out to eat, you had the next best thing waiting for you in the freezer. Plastic trays, divided compartments, and a microwave that promised a meal from the future. Microwave dinners in compartmentalized trays felt like space-age living. You pulled one from the freezer like you were preparing for launch, peeling back the foil just a little, placing it into the microwave, and watching through the glass like it was a science experiment. And in a way, it was. A frozen brick turned into Salisbury steak, corn, and a weirdly perfect scoop of mashed potatoes with a dent in the middle. It was convenience, but it also felt like progress. Like, look how far we've come. We are eating out of black plastic trays and calling it the future. The sections kept your food from touching. Very important. And even if the brownie in the corner came out boiling lava while the peas were still ice cubes, we did not care. This was the future. And for a lot of kids, this was dinner. No family table, no cloth napkins, just a microwave hum and the glow of the television, maybe tuned to reruns or something animated. And let us not forget the TV commercials. Dinner in minutes. Satisfying, delicious, and no cleanup. They made it seem like cooking was a thing of the past. But if you were lucky enough to finish dinner early on a weekend, there was only one place to go where wheels met disco balls and hormones hit the air. Roller rinks in the 1980s had a very specific smell. 1 part popcorn machine, 1 part sweat, 1 part carpet that had absorbed more teen drama than a whole season of television. But somehow, it worked. That scent meant you were in for something electric. The lights dimmed, and the disco ball spun across the floor, casting little starbursts onto every face. Neon stripes lit up the walls. Pop music bounced off the walls. You laced up those brown skates with the orange wheels, too tight always, and hoped your socks would survive. You clutched the railing during your first lap, got brave on your second, and by your third, you were flying or crashing. Or doing both. Couples held hands, little kids weaved like pinballs, and somewhere in the back, a kid tried to moonwalk on wheels and face-planted in spectacular fashion. You showed up with a plastic bag of quarters and dreams. The roller rink was freedom with fluorescent lighting, a dance floor on wheels, a first crush, a slow song, a bruise you wore proudly. And for some kids, it was not just about skating, it was about arriving. With your own soundtrack, blasting from the streets to the sidewalks. If you were the kid who brought the boombox to the park, you held real power. You did not just show up, you announced your presence. That big plastic box slung on your shoulder was basically a one-man radio station, and in that moment, you were the DJ. It took 8D batteries to power the thing, and it weighed more than your backpack, but it was worth it. Push play, and the beat dropped. Break dancers came to life. Basketball games found a rhythm. Conversations had a soundtrack. You could switch between stations, flip tapes, adjust the bass like you were engineering the next big concert. It did not matter if your music was Run DMC or Madonna. What mattered was that you brought it. You gave the afternoon its atmosphere, the playground its pulse. Even if the sound distorted at full volume and your tapes sometimes got eaten, the boombox made you feel seen. And when the batteries died halfway through a song, that was heartbreak. But for some kids, the music did not stop when the sun went down. Because the moment you walked through your front door and found the house empty, that is when the real soundtrack began. Being a latchkey kid in the 1980s meant walking into a quiet house after school, locking the door behind you, and knowing, for a little while, you were on your own. You wore your house key around your neck or stashed it in your shoe, And it was more than just a key. It was a symbol. Freedom, trust, responsibility. You dropped your backpack, grabbed a snack, maybe a Pop-Tart or a fruit roll, and flopped on the couch like you had earned it. Do not answer the phone unless it is family. Do not open the door for anyone. And do not even think about using the stove. But within those boundaries, you created your own world. And you learned how to be okay with that. You learned how to entertain yourself, how to fix your own sandwich, how to keep yourself safe. And when your parents came home, you acted like nothing happened, even though quietly you had grown a little more that day. A little smarter, a little more independent. Still, freedom like that needed boundaries. You were not roaming the streets. You were defending your turf. And if you really wanted to feel in charge of your kingdom, you knew exactly how to build one. Couch cushion forts were the original real estate empire. One minute, your living room was a boring sea of beige. The next, it was a castle, a bunker, a spaceship. You flipped cushions into walls, blankets into roofs, pillows into defense mechanisms. And once the final corner was tucked in, you stepped back and admired your masterpiece. This was architecture with no blueprints, just instinct. You knew which cushions stood tall and which ones sagged, which blanket was best for the roof and which one was just for comfort. The coffee table became a drawbridge. You closed the flaps and disappeared into your own little universe. And for a few golden hours, nothing from the outside world could touch you. Your siblings were either co-architects or invaders, negotiations were had, treaties were made, betrayals were common, but it was all part of the magic. The joy was not just in the building, it was in the claiming. This was yours. And even when it eventually collapsed, when the cushions fell and your parents told you to put everything back, there was pride. Because you had made something real, something that mattered. And whether it was a cardboard box, a treehouse, or just a pile of pillows, kids in the 1980s knew how to turn anything into something unforgettable. Halloween costumes in the 1980s were equal parts imagination and imminent combustion. The materials? Thin plastic, stiff polyester, and a mask that felt like a rubber band choking your face. These outfits came in a cardboard box with a clear window, showing off a crinkled costume and a vacuum-formed mask that smelled like a tire fire. They were sweaty, scratchy, and highly flammable. Add candles, jack-o'-lanterns, or sparklers into the mix, and you had a walking fire hazard. Kids would run from house to house while their capes or plastic sheeting flapped dangerously close to open flames. Some costumes even came with battery packs or accessories that sparked, because clearly, fire safety was not trending. The costumes were usually one-size-fits-none, meaning they dragged on the ground or clung like saran wrap. Parents tried to layer clothes underneath to keep kids warm, unknowingly adding more flammable fabric to the equation. Injuries happened. Fire departments raised concerns. But it wasn't until multiple safety campaigns aired on television, usually during Saturday morning cartoons, that people began paying attention. While those costumes reacted to fire, the next fashion fad reacted to you, and sometimes not in a good way. But families found a simple yet effective solution: draft stoppers. Old rags, torn-up clothes, and fabric scraps were stuffed into gaps beneath doors and around windows, blocking out the cold and keeping heat inside. It was a no-cost fix that required nothing more than some basic ingenuity and a willingness to make do with what was on hand. Nature's role in this process was subtle but significant. People living in rural areas often used materials like hay or straw, both readily available from farms, to stuff into drafty cracks. But even in urban neighborhoods, a bit of creativity could turn any leftover fabric, be it an old jacket or an unused pillowcase, into a barrier against the cold. This practice also promoted a sense of shared responsibility within the household. Family members worked together to make their homes as warm as possible, often taking turns stuffing rags into troublesome spots. The lesson here is clear. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective, and a little frugality can go a long way in creating comfort. When the cold winds of the Great Depression swept through poorly insulated homes, many families had to think outside the box. to conserve heat. Dandelion salad might sound like a fairy tale-like name for an incredibly frugal but delicious meal. By now, you might have noticed the scavenger vibe in terms of ingredients of the dishes so far. People making anything out of whatever they had on hand. Economic downturns often feature lifestyle changes, and the Great Depression was no other, sending people on a scramble to find and eat anything. Dandelion salad took scramble seriously as the meal involved finding and foraging dandelions. You would cut out all the roots, flowers, and waste to make the dressing for a very healthy salad. For people, especially those on a diet and a budget, this was a godsend. For a garnish, all people would usually put on it was lemon juice and olive oil, a dash of salt, and you were good to go at basically no cost. Sometimes a meal is all about comfort, history, and making the most of what's available. Hog jowl and beans is just that, a hearty, flavorful dish that combines salt-cured pork cheek with beans, creating a meal that's both filling and rich in tradition. This dish has roots in the American South, where pork was often the primary source of meat and nothing went to waste. The hog jowl, or pork cheek, was preserved through salting, making it last longer and adding a distinctive savory depth to the dish. Hog jowl and beans became a staple for many, especially during lean times. Beans were affordable, filling, and a great source of protein, while the salty, tender pork cheek added just the right amount of flavor. In fact, the dish became synonymous with both Southern hospitality and resourcefulness, ensuring that families could stretch their food supplies without sacrificing taste. This dish has even found its way into New Year's traditions in some parts of the South, where it's believed to bring good luck and prosperity for the coming year. Maybe that's why they say eating it is like getting a taste of Southern charm, slow-cooked, full of flavor, and with a little bit of good fortune to boot. Hidden time capsules. And if you think delivering milk through a wall sounds wild, wait until you hear about the homes that were designed for smoke. Back in the middle of the 20th century, smoking was not just accepted, it was expected, and American homes were ready for it. That is where built-in ashtray stands came in. These were not just ashtrays placed on coffee tables or countertops. No, these were recessed, often permanent fixtures embedded right into walls, armrests, and even lampstands. You could walk into a living room, and there it was, your own little designated smoke spot, classy as could be. Some were ceramic, some were chrome. A few even had lids to keep the ashes tidy. And they were everywhere, in kitchens, in bathrooms, in bedrooms. The ultimate sign of a home that was with it. Even guests had their own designated ashtrays. People took pride in them. Some were decorative, shaped like seashells or horseshoes. Others were sleek and utilitarian, and it was not just adults using them. Teens had their own, often built into the back of desks or vanities. Today, of course, the idea seems almost alien. We cover smoke detectors in foil just to cook without setting them off. But back then, these ashtrays were part of the home's soul. And when the culture shifted, they vanished fast, ripped out, tiled over, or collecting dust as relics of a time no one wants to remember, but no one can forget. But the next room? Oh, that is where the real memories were made. Think beanbags, shag carpet, and absolute chaos. Toy guns in the 1980s were practically indistinguishable from the real thing. Made with black plastic, realistic shapes, and even working triggers, they had the look and feel of something that should have been locked in a police evidence room. Just a solid chunk of molded chaos that turned playground games into potential panic zones. You'd see kids walking down the street brandishing these things, twirling them like action stars, and every adult in the vicinity would freeze. Police departments issued warnings. Tragic accidents occurred when officers couldn't tell if it was a toy or the real deal. But the toy industry kept churning them out, fueled by action movies, war games, and every kid's dream of being the next big hero. It wasn't until a few high-profile cases made national headlines that things finally changed. New laws came in fast, orange tips became mandatory, and ultra-realistic models were pulled from shelves. Today, toy weapons come in neon pink with Super Blaster written on the side. Speaking of dangerous things that glowed in the dark, let's talk about what used to light up your bedroom walls: radioactive style. The bitter cold didn't stop people during the Great Depression from heading outside to work, run errands, or simply survive the day. But with many unable to afford new shoes or even warm socks, an inventive solution emerged: stuffing shoes with newspaper or cloth for extra insulation. It was a simple trick that turned worn-out footwear into a small haven of warmth. Shoes were often patched and repatched to last as long as possible, but keeping feet warm required a little extra creativity. Newspapers were readily available and lightweight, while scraps of cloth could be repurposed from old clothing or blankets. This method demonstrated how even the humblest materials could be transformed into tools for survival. The environment played a role, too, as people used whatever natural or man-made resources were readily at hand. Parents often taught their children how to make the stuffing work best, passing down lessons in both thriftiness and resilience. Today, this simple innovation reminds us that solutions don't always have to be complex or expensive. When the Great Depression gripped the country, homes were often drafty and poorly insulated, making it nearly impossible to keep the chill at bay. Milk toast is exactly what the name suggests: toasted to perfection bread dipped in milk with a generous slap of butter. On days when any meal you loved was unaffordable and getting up to cook something proper was dreadful, milk toast came through for many families. All you needed was some good fresh bread and a warm glass of milk to gorge on until you felt full. Milk toast quickly became one of the most popular breakfasts in the States, catering specifically to people below the poverty line who could not make most of the items on this list regularly. Nowadays, this might be considered a very vintage meal, the type to get kids asking you what century you might be from. But back then, it was something even working-class 20-year-olds would eat daily. Times have changed, and the breakfast of people in those socioeconomic classes is definitely different. In the midst of freezing temperatures and limited resources, hot drinks became a staple of warmth for families during the Great Depression. Tea, coffee, and broth, simple yet effective, provided both physical warmth and emotional comfort. When the world outside was bitterly cold, these hot beverages acted as small but crucial escapes from the chill. Tea leaves, coffee grounds, and even bones or scraps of meat could be boiled down into a broth, stretching what little food families had. A steaming cup was an essential way to keep spirits up and bodies warm. The role of nature was key here. The cold winters could be harsh, but nature provided the ingredients for these drinks: the herbs for tea, the beans for coffee, and scraps that could be turned into nourishing broths. People adapted their everyday practices to make sure nothing went to waste, showing remarkable resourcefulness. Beyond the warmth they provided, hot drinks also created bonding moments. Families would gather around the stove, sharing stories and passing around mugs, finding warmth not in liquid, but in each other's company. Paint sets in the 1980s made art fun, messy, and occasionally permanently harmful. Many came in colorful plastic trays with cheerful cartoon mascots, perfect for little hands and curious mouths. The catch? Those bold, beautiful colors were often lead-based. That's right. Some of the same pigments used to paint warning signs and old bridges were hiding in your watercolor kit. Kids would dip brushes, fingers, and sometimes their actual tongues into the paint, blissfully unaware that they were absorbing a neurotoxin. Lead poisoning from paint was not some obscure risk. It was a common medical concern in the 80s, especially for kids who spent hours doodling on paper, cardboard, or the wall behind the couch. Parents had no clue. Schools didn't ask questions. It was only when regulation agencies started cracking down that the art supply world scrambled to create non-toxic alternatives. Lead-free labels started appearing on every box. But if you ever used a paint set that smelled a little too chemical and stained your fingers for 2 days, you may have had more exposure than a power plant worker. And when you were done painting, it was time to hit the dance floor on something that had the traction of a banana peel. Bathroom incinerators were exactly what they sound like: tiny metal boxes installed near the toilet, designed to burn trash right on the spot. Sounds efficient, right? Maybe. but also just a little bit terrifying. These units were popular for a short time in the mid-20th century, mostly in homes that were obsessed with cutting-edge convenience. They were meant for tissues, cotton balls, wrappers, and small bits of waste, not, let us be clear, diapers or anything major. You would flip a switch, hear a low hum, and then wait while your trash slowly vanished into ash. It was like having a personal bonfire inside your bathroom. Some even came with a little chimney that vented outside. Of course, the smell was something. And safety? Let's just say it was a different time. These machines were prone to overheating, and if you put the wrong thing in, you might get more flames than you bargained for. Eventually, people realized that trash cans and weekly pickups were a whole lot safer, so the bathroom incinerator quietly disappeared, along with the era of lighting your garbage on fire next to your shampoo. But while the bathroom was heating up, the beauty routines of the day were getting pretty cool. Windows were the weak points in many homes during the Great Depression, allowing cold air to seep in and warm air to escape. But instead of shelling out for expensive insulation, many families got creative by hanging thick curtains or blankets over their windows. It was an easy, low-cost way to reduce heat loss and keep the inside of the house warmer. This simple trick highlights the ingenuity that people had to employ during tough times. Using what they had, whether it was old blankets, heavy curtains, or even quilts, families found a quick fix to an ongoing problem. These materials acted as a barrier, trapping warm air inside while blocking out the cold air from the outside. Cold winters were a given, and homes often lacked the insulation we take for granted today. Yet, in this environment, frugality wasn't a choice. It was essential. People had to make the most of what was available, and hanging blankets was an effective and straightforward solution. This kind of resourcefulness and adaptability is still valuable today, whether you're struggling with rising heating bills or just looking to stay cozy on a budget. Sometimes the most unassuming vegetables are turned into something spectacular, and parsnips are no exception. Grated, mixed into a batter, and fried to golden perfection, parsnip fritters are a delightful twist on traditional fritters often found in kitchens where creativity and thriftiness meet. With their mild, slightly sweet flavor, parsnips provide the perfect base for a savory snack or side dish. While parsnips have been enjoyed since ancient Roman times, they saw a resurgence in popularity during times of scarcity, particularly during the Great Depression, when root vegetables like parsnips were more affordable than other produce. The dish was a way to turn simple, inexpensive ingredients into something flavorful and satisfying. The beauty of parsnip fritters lies in their versatility. While they're commonly served with a sprinkle of salt or a dip in a savory sauce, some cooks even add spices like cinnamon or nutmeg for an unexpected sweetness. Whether enjoyed as a side dish, appetizer, or light snack, parsnip fritters make use of a vegetable that might otherwise be overlooked. Today, they may not be a household name, but these crispy, golden bites continue to remind us that sometimes all it takes is a little batter and some heat to turn a humble vegetable into something extraordinary. During the Great Depression, families had to be creative when it came to conserving heat. One smart trick was closing off rooms. With limited fuel and heating sources, it wasn't about warming up the entire house. It was about warming up the rooms where people spent the most time. By blocking off unused spaces, families could focus their energy on keeping just a few rooms heated, making the most of the heat they had. By utilizing old blankets, curtains, or even makeshift seals, families could effectively block the cold from creeping into the rooms they needed most. It's a clever example of how people adapted everyday practices to make life a little more bearable during a tough time. Frugality played a big role in this strategy too. With the cost of heating being high and resources scarce, every little bit of saved warmth counted. Closing off rooms wasn't just a way to conserve heat. It was a way to conserve the family's energy and effort, letting them focus on the essential. In a world where savings was a luxury few could afford, the lesson here is clear. Sometimes, less is more. You don't need to heat the whole house to stay warm. A survival knife modeled after Rambo was just what the 80s kids needed. These blades were mass-produced, slapped with the Sylvester Stallone brand, and sold to kids who still wore Velcro shoes. The blade, sharp enough to slice through rope. The handle, hollow, because inside was a survival kit, complete with fishing hooks, wire, matches, and sometimes even a tiny compass that barely worked. It was marketed as a tool for outdoor adventures, but in reality it was just a hunting knife that fit in a backpack. Boys would trade them, show them off at school, or use them in backyard missions where at least one kid came back bleeding. Teachers confiscated them, parents shrugged, and the companies? They sold more. Eventually, regulations tightened and most of these survival-style knives disappeared from toy shelves. But if you grew up in the 80s, chances are you or someone you knew had one stashed under their bed, next to their glow-in-the-dark ninja stars. If the knife didn't get you, the next toy might have, with a splash of liquid metal that rolled through your fingertips. Mercury-filled maze toys were the kind of item you now see in museum exhibits labeled Y. Small handheld games with liquid silver beads that glided through tiny plastic channels, mesmerizing, smooth, and completely toxic. You'd tilt the toy back and forth, guiding the Mercury around obstacles like a high-stakes version of Operation. No gloves, no warnings. Just you, the element responsible for Mad Hatter syndrome, and a plastic shell thin enough to crack if you dropped it. These were handed out as party favors and sold at corner stores like they were marbles or gumballs. Toddlers chewed on them. Older kids smashed them open just to play with the shimmering silver liquid inside. It wasn't until researchers started speaking out and when money was scarce and firewood even scarcer, families during the Great Depression turned to whatever they could find to keep their fires burning. Necessity transformed ordinary and sometimes unusual materials into lifelines. Corn cobs, left over after the kernels were eaten, became a popular fuel source in rural areas. They burned quickly but efficiently, making them perfect for stoves and small fires. Dried animal dung, used for centuries by various cultures, was also repurposed as fuel on farms where livestock was common. Even coal scraps discarded by mining operations found a second life in the hearths of resourceful families. This was an ingenious blend of frugality and environmental adaptation. Nothing went to waste. Every bit of material was reused or repurposed. Coal scraps, for instance, were often scavenged by entire communities near mining towns. Children would gather the remnants, bringing home enough to keep their homes warm for another day. It's hard to imagine, but in those days the phrase, "one man's trash is another man's treasure," could be taken quite literally. While burning corn cobs might not be the norm anymore, it's a reminder that even in the harshest times, people found ways to adapt and to persevere. When the Great Depression left families with little money to buy fuel, it was the original shortcut for busy kitchens, long before microwaves or DoorDash deliveries. Right there in the wall, usually between the kitchen and dining room, was a little opening known as a pass-through window. Not big enough to walk through, just big enough to pass a steaming pot of mashed potatoes or a stack of plates. It was part convenience, part conversation starter, and part dinner-time drama stage. You could poke your head through and call out, "Who wants seconds?" Or you could slide a dish over without juggling it across the carpet. In bigger homes, they were framed out in wood or tile with little ledges to rest a casserole on. In smaller homes, they were purely functional, a hole in the wall that saved mom 10 steps at every meal. Some even had shutters or swinging doors, so you could close the kitchen once dinner was served. But eventually, open-concept living took over. People tore down the wall entirely instead of carving a window into it. And just like that, the pass-through became passé. Still, it had its charm. It turned dinner into a kind of performance. But if passing potatoes through a hole in the wall sounds odd, imagine burning your garbage in a machine tucked right next to the toilet. Gasoline-fueled model cars were as close as a child could get to operating a flamethrower without a license. These weren't battery-powered toy cars. These were mini combustion engines, fueled by real gasoline or nitromethane that roared across driveways like demonic Hot Wheels. You'd fill the tiny tank, pull the starter cord, and hope it didn't catch fire in your hands. The engine would sputter, cough, then scream to life with the sound of a weed whacker on steroids. Once running, these things hit 30 miles per hour easy. Control was optional. You'd aim it straight, watch it veer into the neighbor's leg, and hope it didn't explode. They were hot, loud, and prone to sudden flare-ups. Burns, inhalation hazards, and flying debris were just part of the charm. Parents thought it was good engineering fun. Emergency rooms thought otherwise. Eventually, the combination of fire risk, noise complaints, and endless injury reports forced manufacturers to pivot toward electric versions. Today's RC cars run cool and quiet. But back then, if yours didn't have a trail of smoke behind it, were you even playing? And speaking of painful toys disguised as accessories, let's not forget what happened when slap bracelets started slicing through sleeves and skin. Let's talk about a culinary pairing so simple it feels almost too obvious: eggs and butter. When combined into a creamy spread, it's a game changer. Egg butter, an unassuming mix of chopped boiled eggs and softened butter, was a staple born from practicality and versatility. Spread it on bread, pair it with crackers, or use it as a filling, and you've got a rich, satisfying treat. Egg butter has its roots in Northern and Eastern Europe, particularly Finland, where it's known as munavoi. Traditionally, it's served with rye bread or karjalan piraka, a type of pastry. Immigrants brought the recipe to America, where it found a home as a budget-friendly spread, especially during lean times. After all, when protein was scarce, this combination packed a double punch. Boiled eggs and butter were often kitchen staples, making this dish both accessible and economical. And if you think about it, it's essentially the predecessor to egg salad, only without the mayonnaise. With its velvety texture and timeless appeal, egg butter might just be the original butterboard's trend. Only, instead of Instagram likes, it earned a spot on the dinner table through sheer practicality. Popper toys were supposed to bounce, not try to kill you. You remember them, those colorful half-sphere rubber domes you'd flip inside out, set on a table, and wait for the dramatic pop. They'd launch into the air, bounce off walls, and send toddlers into fits of laughter. But that laughter turned into choking sounds more often than toy companies would like to admit. The smaller ones were just the right size to lodge in a child's windpipe. No warning labels, no age recommendations, just a bin full of potential emergency visits. If it bounced under the couch, your little sibling would be the first to dive after it, and sometimes straight into a medical emergency. Parents bought them by the dozen at grocery store checkout lanes. Eventually, safety boards stepped in, issuing recalls and choking hazard warnings left and right. The toy aisle cleaned up a little. But if you grew up in the 80s, you know the truth. That little rubber dome had the soul of a landmine. And if that did not take your eye out, the next one just might, because it had actual spinning metal blades. Let us talk about the rumpus room. If the living room was where adults behaved themselves, the rumpus room was where the kids got wild. Usually tucked away in the basement, this was the unofficial playground of every suburban household from the 1950s to the 1970s. Carpeted in wall-to-wall shag, lit by lava lamps, and often filled with beanbag chairs, dartboards, and mismatched furniture, the rumpus room was every child's dream and every parent's secret weapon. You could send the kids down there for hours, let them roughhouse, make noise, and burn off all that energy while the grown-ups enjoyed some blessed peace upstairs. It was not about looking nice, it was about cutting loose. Some had jukeboxes, others had board games stacked to the ceiling, and every now and then you would find a couch that doubled as a trampoline. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. Over time, the idea faded as homes got bigger and open concepts took over. Now, everything is multifunctional. But there was something beautiful about a room that existed just for noise, mess, and memory making. The name says it all, rumpus. No rules, just vibes. But even in the loudest house, you still needed a way to call the kids upstairs. And you will not believe how we used to do that. The Fisher-Price roller skates of the 1980s were a rite of passage and a recipe for disaster. Marketed as beginner-friendly, they strapped right over your sneakers with plastic clips and offered no ankle support, no control, and absolutely no brakes. You'd take 2 steps and feel like a baby giraffe on ice. Once those wheels started rolling, good luck stopping unless you hit a patch of grass or a parked car. The plastic wheels were rock hard, the straps barely held, and the only safety feature was your mom yelling from the porch. Every sidewalk crack became a personal lawsuit waiting to happen. Knees were scraped, elbows were bruised, and somehow that just made them cooler. You'd decorate them with stickers, wear them inside the house, and attempt jumps off the curb that nearly ended your career before it began. Manufacturers added brakes, padding, and adjustable sizing. But the original no-brake rockets? Banned, recalled, and memorialized in every scraped knee photo from your childhood. If you skated too far from home, you might have run into someone carrying the next banned item, something that looked a little too real. If this brought back even one memory you forgot you had, drop it in the comments. We want to hear your best, weirdest, most 80s moment. And if you felt the vibe, like the video and subscribe, because nostalgia is way better when it's shared.